I'm Lisa Rogers, and I've been building client relationships in tech consulting since before most people knew what cloud computing meant. 5 years ago, I joined Century Tech thinking I'd found my professional home. The company specialized in digital transformation for mid-size businesses, and I was good at it. Really good. I had a knack for understanding what clients actually needed versus what they thought they wanted. But Frank, my boss? Frank had this way of making me feel invisible whenever the stakes got high. The small accounts? Sure, Lisa can handle those. The routine maintenance contracts? Perfect for Lisa. But the moment a Fortune 500 company walked through our doors, suddenly I wasn't qualified anymore. The pattern started subtle. Lisa, why don't you let me take the lead on this one? Became Lisa, I think this might be over your head, which eventually morphed into Lisa, stick to what you know best. And what did I know best, according to Frank? Apparently, nothing that mattered. The quantum industry's opportunity was different though. They weren't just looking for a vendor, they were seeking a strategic partner for a complete digital overhaul. 3 months of relationship building, late-night research sessions, understanding their pain points better than they understood them themselves. I'd mapped out their entire organizational structure, identified the key decision-makers, and crafted a proposal that addressed every concern they'd raised. Then Frank swooped in. Lisa, I'll be taking point on quantum, he announced during our Monday team meeting, not even looking up from his phone. This is a 7-figure deal. Not really your wheelhouse. Have you ever felt your professional identity crumble in real time? The room went quiet. My colleagues suddenly found their laptops fascinating. I could feel heat crawling up my neck. Actually, Frank, I've been developing this relationship for months. I know there. Right. And you've done great groundwork. Really. But when it comes to the actual pitch, the big decisions. He made this dismissive gesture, like brushing crumbs off a table. Let's be realistic about capabilities here. Realistic about capabilities. The words echoed in my head for the rest of the day. That afternoon, Frank strutted into the conference room where I was preparing materials for what I thought was our joint presentation. Oh, Lisa. Change of plans. The quantum pitch is tomorrow, and I'll be flying solo. Corporate thinks it's better to have one clear voice. You understand. I understood, all right. I understood that 3 months of my work was about to be handed to someone who couldn't even pronounce their CTO's name correctly. Frank, I built this entire relationship. I know every stakeholder, every concern, every. Lisa. He held up his hand like a traffic cop. Not ready for big deals. That's just the truth. Stick to small fries. That's where you shine. Small fries. Like I was running a roadside burger stand instead of managing complex B2B relationships worth millions. The next day, I watched from my desk as Frank adjusted his tie and grabbed the presentation folder, my presentation folder, heading off to what should have been our meeting. My phone buzzed with a text from Quantum's project manager, Angela, looking forward to seeing you today, Lisa. Your insights have been invaluable. I stared at that message for a long time. 3 days later, Frank stormed back from another quantum meeting, his face the color of a ripe tomato. He slammed the conference room door so hard the glass rattled. Emergency team meeting. Now. We filed in like students called to the principal's office. Frank paced behind the table, loosening his tie with jerky movements. Quantum walked. Just walked away. 3 months down the drain. His voice cracked slightly. Anyone want to explain to me why a sure thing just became a dead deal? The silence stretched uncomfortably. I felt everyone's eyes drift toward me, then quickly away. What exactly happened? Asked Julie from operations. Frank ran his hands through his hair. They said the proposal felt disconnected from our previous conversations. That the person presenting didn't understand their core challenges. That they'd built trust with someone else on our team and were confused by the last-minute switch. The irony was so thick you could serve it with a spoon. Did they say who they'd built trust with? Julie pressed gently. Frank's jaw tightened. They specifically mentioned working with Lisa. Said they'd expected her to be part of the presentation team. Every head in the room turned toward me. I sat very still, my hands folded in my lap, feeling a strange calm settle over me. This was my moment. Not the moment I'd planned, but the moment I needed. Frank, I said quietly, I tried to tell you. You tried to tell me what? His tone was defensive now, borderline hostile. That I knew this client. That I'd spent 3 months understanding their business, their culture, their decision-making process. That they trusted me. Well, you could have mentioned. I did mention it. Multiple times. My voice was steady, almost clinical. You dismissed my input because you decided I wasn't ready for big deals. The room felt charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. Frank's face cycled through several emotions: anger, embarrassment, defiance. Look, that's not. I mean, experience matters in these situations. Yes, I agreed. It does. Which is why I'm confused about why you sidelined the person with the most experience with this particular client. Have you ever reached that point where politeness just evaporates? Where you realize that being accommodating hasn't protected you, it's just made you smaller? That was my Tuesday afternoon revelation. You know what? I stood up slowly. I need to make a call. I walked to my desk, picked up my phone, and dialed Angela's number. The conversation lasted 15 minutes. When I hung up, the entire office was watching me. Frank emerged from the conference room. What was that about? I called Angela at Quantum. Explained that there had been some internal miscommunication, but that I was still very much invested in finding them the right solution. I met his eyes directly. She's agreed to a follow-up meeting. This Friday. With me. You can't just. Actually, I can. They requested me specifically. And since you've made it clear that this account is too important to lose. I shrugged. I figured you'd want me to fix it. The next 48 hours were the most professionally satisfying of my career. I rebuilt the presentation from scratch, incorporating everything I'd learned about Quantum's real needs, not what we thought they should need, but what they actually needed. I prepared for every possible question, mapped out implementation timelines, and crafted a proposal that spoke their language. Friday morning, I sat across from Angela and her team in Quantum's gleaming conference room. The presentation flowed like water. They asked tough questions, I had thoughtful answers. They raised concerns, I addressed each one methodically. Lisa, Angela said as we wrapped up, this is exactly what we were looking for. The other presentation felt like someone reading from a script. This feels like partnership. I smiled. That's because it is partnership. I've been thinking about your challenges for months. They signed the contract the following Monday. 7 figures, just like Frank had said. The largest deal in Century Tech's history. Frank called me into his office Tuesday morning. He looked smaller somehow, deflated. The Quantum contract, he began. Yes? Good work. I waited. There had to be more. I may have misjudged the situation. May have. The understatement of the decade. Frank, can I ask you something? I leaned forward slightly. What exactly made you think I couldn't handle big deals? He shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't that you couldn't handle them, it was just. I don't know. I thought corporate would prefer. Prefer what? Someone with more. I don't know, presence? Authority? And there it was. The real reason. Not my competence, not my track record, not my relationship with the client. My presence. My authority. Translation: Frank thought a middle-aged white guy would be more impressive than a competent woman who'd actually done the work. I see, I said simply. But obviously, you proved me wrong. The client loves you. Corporate is thrilled. Everyone's happy. Everyone's happy. Like it was all just a misunderstanding, a little mix-up that worked out in the end. Frank, I need you to understand something. I kept my voice level, professional. This wasn't beginner's luck. This wasn't me getting lucky with one client. This was me doing what I've been doing successfully for 5 years, despite being constantly told I wasn't ready for bigger challenges. He nodded quickly. Right, of course. So going forward, I'd like to discuss my role in client acquisition and relationship management. Particularly with larger accounts. We had that conversation. A long, detailed conversation about expectations and opportunities and recognition. I came prepared with data, my client retention rates, my upselling success, my referral numbers. all the metrics that mattered, laid out in black and white. By the end of the month, I had a new title, Senior Director of Client Strategy. By the end of the quarter, I was leading 3 major pitches. By the end of the year, I'd brought in more revenue than any other individual contributor in company history. But the real change wasn't in my title or salary. It was in how I showed up. No more waiting for permission. No more accepting dismissive comments about my capabilities. When I knew I was right, I said so. When I had expertise, I shared it. When someone tried to sideline me, I stepped forward instead of stepping back. The morning after the quantum contract signing, Angela sent me an email. "Lisa, thank you for fighting for this partnership. We knew we were in good hands when you called to clarify the situation. That's the kind of integrity we want to work with." Integrity. She saw my pushback as integrity, not insubordination. She saw my refusal to accept dismissal as strength, not difficult behavior. That email is framed on my desk now, next to a photo from the company awards dinner where I received the Outstanding Achievement recognition. Frank presented the award, shaking my hand with what looked like genuine respect. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd spoken up sooner. If I'd challenged the small fries comment the first time instead of the 50th. If I'd trusted my expertise instead of deferring to someone else's assumptions about my limitations. But maybe the timing was exactly right. Maybe I needed to accumulate enough frustration to fuel the courage. Maybe I needed to reach that breaking point where staying small felt more dangerous than taking up space. Here's what I know now: competence doesn't always speak for itself. Sometimes you have to speak for your competence. Sometimes you have to insist that your voice be heard, your expertise be recognized, your contributions be valued. And sometimes, when someone tells you you're not ready for big deals, the best response is to go out and close the biggest deal in company history. Tell me, have you ever had a moment where you realized you'd been making yourself smaller to make someone else comfortable? What would it look like to take up the space you've earned? Because somewhere out there, someone is being told they're not ready. Someone is being dismissed as small fries by someone who doesn't see their potential. But here's where the story gets really interesting. 3 weeks after my promotion, I discovered something that changed everything I thought I knew about Century Tech and Frank's behavior. I was cleaning out my new office. Yes, they gave me Frank's old corner office when he got moved to strategic oversight, when I found a folder wedged behind his old filing cabinet. Inside were performance reviews. Not just mine, but everyone's on our team. What I read made my stomach drop. Frank had been systematically undermining the women on our team for years. Julie from operations? He'd written that she lacked the assertiveness needed for leadership roles while simultaneously blocking her from client-facing opportunities. Melissa from analytics? Better suited for behind-the-scenes work than frontline presentations. The pattern was crystal clear once you saw it laid out in black and white. But the most damning document was an email chain from 2 years ago between Frank and the previous department head. Subject line: managing ambitious female staff. I wish I could unsee what I read next. Lisa Rogers continues to push for bigger accounts. I've been redirecting her energy towards smaller clients where she can't cause problems if she fails. Women in this industry often overestimate their capabilities, better to keep expectations manageable. Overestimate their capabilities. Like ambition was a character flaw instead of a professional asset. The reply was even worse: agreed. Keep the women happy with steady work but away from high-stakes deals. Board members still prefer working with men on major contracts. I sat in that empty office, holding evidence of systematic discrimination, feeling a rage so pure it was almost crystalline. This wasn't about Frank thinking I wasn't ready. This was about Frank actively ensuring I would never become ready. Have you ever discovered that what you thought was personal incompetence was actually institutional oppression? It's like finding out the game was rigged while you were blaming yourself for not winning. I made copies of everything. Then I made a decision that would change not just my career, but the entire culture at Century Tech. The next morning, I requested a meeting with Corentin Hayes, our CEO. Not through Frank, not through HR, but directly. I'd worked with Corentin on 2 previous client emergencies, and he'd always respected my judgment. His assistant initially tried to redirect me through proper channels, but I was persistent. Tell him Lisa Rogers needs 15 minutes regarding the quantum industry's success and some concerning discoveries about our client acquisition process. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Corentin in his mahogany-paneled office, the folder of evidence on the table between us. Lisa, congratulations again on Quantum. Impressive work. Thank you, Corentin. But that's actually why I'm here. I need to show you something that explains why that deal almost failed. I walked him through the documents methodically. His expression shifted from curiosity to confusion to barely contained anger. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. How long has this been going on? Based on these documents? At least 2 years. But honestly, probably longer. He picked up the email chain and read it again, his jaw tightening. This is not who we are as a company, Lisa. This is not what Century Tech stands for. I know. Which is why I'm bringing it to you instead of to outside counsel. That got his attention. Outside counsel? This is textbook discrimination, Corentin. Documented, systematic, affecting multiple employees. I could have walked this to an employment attorney yesterday. But you didn't. No. Because I believe in this company. I believe in what we're trying to build. But this has to be addressed properly, completely, and transparently. What followed was 3 weeks of the most intense internal investigation I've ever witnessed. HR brought in external consultants. They interviewed every employee, reviewed every performance evaluation, analyzed every major deal assignment from the past 5 years. The results were damning. Frank wasn't alone. The pattern extended to 3 other department heads, affecting nearly every woman in client-facing roles. Promotional opportunities had been consistently steered toward male employees, even when women had superior performance metrics. But here's what surprised me, some of the men were just as frustrated. Carlos Mendez from business development had been passed over for senior positions multiple times, despite bringing in consistent results. Alex Wong from technical solutions had been pigeonholed into back-end roles even though he excelled at client presentations. The discrimination wasn't just about gender, it was about who fit a narrow image of what leadership looked like at Century Tech. Corentin called an all-hands meeting on a Friday afternoon. The energy in the room was tense, uncertain. Rumors had been circulating for weeks about the investigation. I'm going to be direct, he began, his voice carrying to the back of the conference room. We've discovered systematic bias in our promotion and assignment processes. This ends today. He outlined the findings without naming names, but everyone could read between the lines. Frank had already been quietly reassigned to an external consulting role, basically a face-saving termination. 2 other managers had been placed on performance improvement plans with strict oversight. Effective immediately, we're implementing new protocols for client assignments and performance reviews. Every major account assignment will require justification based on documented criteria. Every performance review will be double-checked by someone outside the employee's direct reporting line. But the real change came next. We're also restructuring our senior leadership team. I'm pleased to announce that Lisa Rogers will be leading our new client success division, reporting directly to me. This division will oversee all client relationships above the $500,000 threshold. The room erupted in applause. I felt my face flush, but this time with pride instead of embarrassment. After the meeting, colleagues I'd barely spoken to came up to congratulate me. But more importantly, they came up to share their own stories. Julie told me about being excluded from strategy meetings because they were held at a sports bar where she wouldn't fit in. Carlos described being told his accent might confuse clients during presentations. Alex shared how his technical expertise was valued but his client relationship skills were ignored. We weren't isolated cases. We were a pattern. Over the next 6 months, I built my new division from scratch. I hired 3 senior account managers, 2 women and 1 man, all chosen purely on merit. I implemented transparent criteria for account assignments. I created mentorship programs pairing junior staff with senior team members across gender and cultural lines. But the most satisfying moment came 8 months later, during our quarterly review meeting. I was presenting the Client Success Division's results to the board. 12 major accounts. Revenue up 340% year-over-year. Client satisfaction scores at an all-time high. Industry recognition for our innovative approach to digital transformation consulting. Lisa, interrupted board member Patricia Blackstone, these numbers are extraordinary. How did you achieve this kind of growth so quickly? I smiled, remembering Frank's dismissive wave all those months ago. We stopped making assumptions about who was ready for big deals. We started assigning opportunities based on competence, relationship building skills, and client fit. We discovered we had extraordinary talent that was being systematically underutilized. Underutilized how? People being told they weren't ready when they were already prepared. Expertise being dismissed due to unconscious bias about what leadership looks like. Clients asking for specific team members who were then excluded from major presentations. I clicked to my next slide, showing retention rates. When people feel valued for their actual contributions instead of sidelined due to assumptions, they perform at levels that surprise everyone, including themselves. Corentin nodded slowly. And the client feedback? They love working with teams that actually understand their needs. Turns out, diverse perspectives and deep expertise matter more than traditional presentations of authority. After the meeting, Patricia approached me privately. Lisa, I have to ask, how long were you aware of the bias issues? I thought about that question carefully. I was aware I was being held back. I wasn't aware it was systematic until I found the documentation. But looking back, the signs were everywhere. I just kept assuming the problem was me. What would you tell someone who's experiencing similar treatment now? Document everything. Trust your expertise. Don't keep making yourself smaller hoping someone will notice you're capable. And if you have evidence of systematic bias, bring it forward, but bring it strategically. 6 months later, Century Tech was featured in Forbes as a case study in organizational transformation. The article highlighted our revenue growth, client satisfaction improvements, and cultural change initiatives. But my favorite quote came from Angela at Quantum Industries: "Working with Century Tech feels different now. They actually listen to what we need instead of telling us what we should want." That starts with having Lisa Rogers leading the relationship, but it extends to their entire approach. They've become true partners instead of just vendors. True partners. That's what happens when you stop assuming and start listening. When you value competence over comfort. When you create space for people to use their full capabilities instead of limiting them to narrow expectations. Frank, by the way, started his own consulting firm 6 months after leaving Century Tech. Last I heard, he was struggling to land major clients. Turns out, dismissive leadership doesn't translate well to independent practice where results matter more than hierarchy. But I don't spend much time thinking about Frank anymore. I'm too busy thinking about the team we're building, the clients we're serving, and the culture we're creating. 3 weeks ago, I hired a brilliant analyst named Jordan Kim. During the interview, Jordan mentioned being told at their previous company that they weren't quite leadership material yet despite consistently exceeding targets. I smiled, recognizing the familiar language of unfounded limitation. "Jordan," I said, "let me ask you something different. If you could design your ideal career trajectory here, what would it look like?" Their eyes lit up as they described ambitious goals, innovative strategies, meaningful client relationships. "That sounds perfect," I told them. "When can you start?" Because here's what I've learned: the phrase "not ready" is often code for doesn't fit our narrow assumptions. The solution isn't to make yourself smaller to fit those assumptions. The solution is to change the assumptions. Tell me, what would your workplace look like if competence was the only criteria that mattered? What barriers would disappear if we stopped making decisions based on comfort and started making them based on capability? Somewhere right now, someone is being told they're not ready for big deals. Someone is being dismissed as small fries by someone who can't see past their own limitations. Don't let that be your story forever. Sometimes the biggest deal isn't the contract you sign, it's the decision to bet on yourself and then create systems that let others bet on themselves too. The game might be rigged, but that doesn't mean you have to keep playing by those rules. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is succeed so obviously that the rules have to change. But success isn't just about individual achievement, it's about creating ripple effects that extend far beyond your own career. 2 years after my promotion, I received an unexpected call from Marina Volkov, a senior executive at Pinnacle Dynamics, one of our biggest competitors. We'd crossed paths at industry conferences, but we'd never worked together directly. "Lisa, I have an unusual proposition for you," she began. "I've been watching what Century Tech has accomplished since your leadership changes. The industry is talking about your approach to client relationships and team development." I was intrigued. "What kind of proposition?" "I want to hire you as a consultant. Not to steal your clients or your strategies, but to help us identify and address our own blind spots. We're losing talented people, and frankly, our client retention isn't where it should be. Have you ever been asked to help your competition? It felt surreal, but also like validation of everything we'd built. Marina, that's flattering, but why not just implement similar changes internally? Her laugh was rueful. Because we don't know what we don't know. We need someone who's actually lived through this transformation, not just read about it in business journals. That conversation led to the most unexpected chapter of my career. With Corentin's blessing, he saw it as industry leadership that would ultimately benefit everyone. I began consulting for 3 major firms on organizational bias and talent optimization. What I discovered was both alarming and encouraging. The problems at Century Tech weren't unique. Nearly every company I worked with had similar patterns of underutilizing talent based on unconscious assumptions. But they also had incredible people ready to excel if given the opportunity. At Pinnacle Dynamics, I worked with their head of HR to redesign their performance review process. We implemented blind evaluations for project assignments, where client fit and technical skills were assessed without names or photos. Within 6 months, their internal promotion rates for women and minorities increased by 190%. At Meridian Solutions, we tackled their client presentation process. They'd had a culture of sending only senior white male executives to major pitches, regardless of who had developed the relationship. We created mixed teams based on expertise and client connection rather than traditional hierarchy. Their win rate on competitive bids jumped from 34% to 67%. But the most profound change happened at my third consulting client, Steinberg & Associates. During my initial assessment, I interviewed a junior consultant named Yuki Tanaka who reminded me painfully of my younger self. Brilliant, hardworking, consistently delivering excellent results, and consistently being told she needed more seasoning before handling bigger responsibilities. "How long have you been here?" I asked. 4 years. I brought in 8 new clients, maintained perfect satisfaction scores, and my project completion rate is 98%. But every time I ask about advancement opportunities, they suggest I focus on developing my executive presence. Executive presence. That familiar phrase that meant everything and nothing. "Yuki, what does executive presence mean to you?" She hesitated. "I think it means being more like the partners. More assertive, more. I don't know, traditional? What if I told you that your current approach is exactly what clients are looking for in today's market?" Her eyes widened. "What do you mean?" I shared something I'd learned from analyzing our most successful client relationships. The old model of authoritative, top-down consulting was becoming obsolete. Clients wanted collaboration, authenticity, and deep understanding of their challenges. They wanted consultants who listened more than they talked. "Yuki, your lack of executive presence might actually be your greatest professional asset. You just need to be in an environment that recognizes that." 6 months later, Yuki was promoted to senior consultant and given her own client portfolio. A year after that, she was leading their most innovative projects. But more importantly, she'd found her confidence, not by changing who she was, but by working in a system that valued who she was. These consulting experiences taught me something crucial. Individual success stories, while important, pale in comparison to systemic change. Every person we help reach their potential creates opportunities for others. Every barrier we remove makes the path easier for the next person. Which brings me to last month's industry conference in Chicago. I was giving the keynote address on talent optimization in professional services when I noticed a familiar face in the audience. Frank Carrington, sitting in the back row, taking notes. After my presentation, he approached during the networking reception. He looked older, humbler somehow. "Lisa, that was an impressive presentation." I studied his face, looking for the condescension I remembered. It wasn't there. "Thank you, Frank." I wanted to apologize. For how I handled things. For not seeing what was right in front of me. An apology. After all these years, I hadn't expected that. "I appreciate that, Frank. What changed your perspective?" He gestured toward the conference program, where my bio listed all the companies I'd helped transform. "Results are hard to argue with. And watching you succeed, it made me realize how much talent I probably overlooked over the years." "Probably?" He winced slightly. "Definitely. I've been doing a lot of reflection since leaving Century Tech, trying to understand why my own consulting practice has struggled while companies implementing your strategies are thriving. It was a moment of genuine humility from someone who'd rarely shown it before. Frank, the good news is that awareness is the first step toward change. What matters is what you do with that understanding going forward. We talked for another 20 minutes. He asked thoughtful questions about unconscious bias, about creating inclusive team dynamics, about recognizing different types of leadership potential. It was the conversation we should have had years ago. As he prepared to leave, Frank paused. Lisa, would you be willing to look at my consulting practice? Not as a client necessarily, but maybe some informal feedback on how I could improve. The request surprised me. A few years ago, I might have felt vindicated by his struggle. Now, I mostly felt hopeful about his willingness to learn. Send me some information about your current approach and challenges. I'll take a look. Because here's what I've realized, transformation isn't about punishing people for past mistakes. It's about creating better systems going forward. It's about helping everyone, including former skeptics, become part of the solution. The ripple effects continue to spread. Jordan Kim, the analyst I hired 2 years ago, just landed our biggest client contract ever, a multi-year partnership with a Fortune 100 company. Julie from operations now runs her own successful consulting firm specializing in process optimization. Carlos Mendez became a senior partner at another firm and actively mentors Latino professionals entering the industry. Each success creates space for the next person. Each barrier removed makes the path wider for others. Sometimes I think about that Monday morning when Frank dismissed me from the quantum pitch. How different my career might have been if I'd accepted his assessment of my limitations. How many other talented people have been sidelined by similar assumptions? But mostly, I think about the future. About the next generation of professionals who won't have to prove they're ready for big deals because competence will be the only criteria that matters. About workplaces where potential is recognized regardless of who possesses it. The game might be rigged, but that doesn't mean you have to keep playing by those rules. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is succeed so obviously that the rules have to change. And when they do change, make sure you're there to help write the new ones.